Okay, so I've just got two layers here that I'm going to use, municipal boundary and also the tsunami warning towers. I'm just going to use these layers to highlight how you can do a buffer. So first, we want to buffer the municipal boundary by 1 kilometer. That's going to allow us to look at not just the areas within the municipal boundaries, because it has a pretty wonky shape, right? We don't want to, say, ignore the First Nations Reserve that is essentially within the city, just not technically part of the city. We don't want to ignore the outlying areas either. So we're going to buffer this, and then we're going to use that buffer to do our clip. So in order to buffer, buffering is one of the simplest geoprocessing things. You see it's already in my favorites because I use it quite a bit, but if you just search for buffer, you can just click under Analysis Tools. It's the first one that pops up. And so buffering is a pretty straightforward process. Under Input Features, you just select your municipal boundary. The Output Feature class is just going to say municipal boundary. Notice it's in your risk assessment already, right? So your geodatabase is the default location that anything's going to be saved to. So you just leave that as is. And then the main thing that you need to do with a buffer is just set the distance. So we're going to do 1,000, and the linear unit should by default change to meters. If it's not meters, you want to make sure to set it to that. Leave everything else as is, and then we'll click Run. Takes a second to run, and then you will end up with a buffer layer. So you'll have this municipal boundary buffer, and you'll see that it basically looks like a marshmallowed version of the municipal boundary. So it just extended the boundaries by 1 kilometer and rounds everything off. Now, to highlight a little bit more about the options with the buffer tool, I'm going to use this tsunami warning towers, which you're going to buffer later on in the lab as well. So let's say we want to buffer the tsunami warning towers by 1,000 meters. We'll leave everything else, the default's the same. You'll see this dissolve type. We're going to leave it as no dissolve for now, and we're just going to run it and see what happens. So these warning towers are just points. So it's just going to buffer it by a radius of 1,000 meters. So this highlights really well kind of what a buffer is doing. It's just basically tracing a line around it. Now I set the dissolve type to none, and so we end up with distinct spheres around each warning tower. But if you set the dissolve type to dissolve all outputs into a single feature and you run it, then you end up with all of them merged together into one. And so depending on what you're trying to do, and what the circumstances entail, you just need to think through whether or not you should dissolve at all. Now, the other option is you could dissolve features using listed fields, and so then you would just enter the dissolve field. Now, each of these tsunami warning towers has a unique field ID and location, so it's not applicable here. But say you were working with another layer where you only wanted certain types to be merged together, you could merge based on a certain field.